If you're in your 20s or at any stage of your life trying to figure out what comes next, these are 5 life lessons that can help you build a life you truly love waking up to. These are hard truths that would have saved us years of spinning our wheels, playing it safe, and wondering why we weren't getting the results that we wanted. All 5 of these lessons can be summed up by saying, if you want your life to look differently than it does right now, you're going to have to be willing to do things differently than you're doing them right now. But we have so much to cover in today's episode, so let's get right into them.
Yes, we have a lot to cover, and I'm really excited. I think these are really good lessons I think we all need a reminder of. The first one I think is something that is really, really relevant regardless of where you are in life, and it's that you can't expect exceptional results with average effort. It's just not possible. I think everyone wants to be really exceptional, but most people are not willing to put in exceptional effort. They want to do what the average person is doing and see exceptional results. And I think it's because we often forget how much effort it actually takes to be exceptional and what that actually looks like on a daily basis. And so to give you all some perspective on what the average actually looks like, because I think this is really fascinating, but the average American exercises for less than 20 minutes per day. The average American makes around $63,000 per year and has $104,755 in consumer debt. And the average American reads at an 8th grade reading level and spends around 5 hours per day on their phone. And I think that that's not something we should strive for. I don't think we should strive for average. I think we should strive for exceptional. And I think that the people listening to this podcast are people who are striving for exceptional, but we have to remember that those things come with exceptional effort.
I do think we hear this a lot when we're talking about career and wealth building when it comes to your career, because obviously on this podcast all the time, and I know on our own social media channels too, we talk a lot about multiple streams of income, side hustles, building a business, becoming a content creator. And those are things that are intended to make you money in either multiple ways or in addition to your job. And you're kind of, it has that hustle culture kind of connotation. And a lot of people come back to that and say, well, you shouldn't have to have like multiple streams of income to get really far ahead. And I think that this is a really good conversation to have around, what does average look like, and are you striving for average or are you striving for exceptional? Because at the end of the day, one stream of income in most cases, or like your full-time job in most cases, is not designed systematically to make you wealthy and to make you exceptional. And obviously there are ways to have one stream of income and become exceptional, become wealthy, but it probably is going to take a lot more work than the average person is putting in, because you're not looking for average results. You're looking for those exceptional results.
Absolutely. And I think it relates to all aspects of life. And I think that's where we tend to forget. And I want this section of this episode to be such a reminder for people listening that this goes across all domains of life. For example, if you want to be an exceptional employee, you want to move up the ranks at your company, you want to increase your income, get bigger raises than your colleagues are, you're going to do a lot better if you strive to be exceptional at your role. If you learn how to network and you learn how to ask the right questions when you're networking, if you go above and beyond even outside of work, making sure that you're coming to work, energized and ready to go and like with all of your brain cells intact, right? If you want to build generational wealth, you're going to have to put in exceptional effort to be able to increase your income, to save even when you don't want to invest more than you think you need to. And I think it also goes into more of your personal life, in that if you grew up in a way that maybe you didn't love and you're like, I want to raise kids I want to do it differently. I don't want to do it how my parents did. You don't get to do that by just doing what the average American does, aka nothing about their situation and just being really passive about it, and then hoping that when it comes time to raise kids that they magically have all the tools they need. Like, no, that's why things get repeated so easily. You break that cycle by doing things that are above the normal, outside the normal, that are exceptional, like going to therapy, learning about yourself, healing the trauma. It goes across so many domains of life. I think about it in relationships a lot too. I think that's so relevant to women in their 20s and 30s. It's like, if you want to have really, really healthy relationships, and let's say you have a cycle of unhealthy relationships, and even sometimes you're the problem. I used to have an anxious attachment style, and it led me to be the problem a lot in relationships. And you don't just magically get rid of those things and start to have healthier relationships overnight. And the average thing to do would be to just, yeah, be passive about it, leave it and say, oh, whatever, they're the problem, and never look inward to see what we can do. It's like, no, if you want an exceptional relationship, you have to do those exceptional things. That is going to therapy and talking about the things you don't want to talk about, recognizing where you might be the problem, where your own toxic traits are, where you can improve, holding your standards, even when it means waiting longer for a relationship. Those are all things, that's exceptional effort. And like, I think we forget that sometimes. That takes a lot of work.
I think about that a lot too with the 5 a.m. club trend.
Yes,
you know, obviously,
yeah.
like if you wake up at 5 a.m., you're in the 5 a.m. club, right? And I think a lot of people kind of, I don't want to say demonize it, but kind of like look down on it and say like, you don't have to do it, which you absolutely don't have to do it. You don't have to do any of these things we're talking about. But people who wake up at 5 a.m. are totally exceptional. Like that is such an exceptional thing to do, to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's almost always paired with some form of movement, exercise. You starting your day by waking up early, giving yourself time in the morning to focus on yourself, moving your body, you are already so far ahead of probably 99% of Americans.
Yes.
I would say like that is so exceptional. I think about it too with college, I think is a really good example of this. I don't want to say going to college is the bare minimum because it's like definitely a privilege. Not everybody gets to do it. However, going to college in and of itself is not exceptional and not going to put you on an exceptional path. There was a video on TikTok, I believe last year, that went viral. And it was a girl, a recent college grad. She posted a video saying she just graduated from college and applied to like 200 jobs. And the only thing that she got a call back from was a customer service role. And in the video, she explicitly said, I'm overqualified for this customer service role. And all of the comments on the video were basically saying like, girl, you going to college does not make you overqualified for anything. Going to college, and probably if she was applying to these types of roles, she probably got some type of like business degree, right? That inherently doesn't make you qualified to get hired at a company, know anything about business. If you studied management, you can't become a manager just because you studied management. Like that is in some cases the quote unquote bare minimum. You do really have to take it upon yourself to go over and above in your college experience to get internships, develop skills that are actually going to make your employers want to hire you when you graduate. So I think about that a lot too.
Yeah. I mean, if you're the person hiring and you're looking at the pool of applicants and it's all people who just graduated from college, well, guess what the common thing between all of them is the college degree. So then they're looking for these points where someone was exceptional to make them stand out. I think about this a lot with fitness too, because I have been trying to get back into like exercising consistently and everything. And I have friends who are so disciplined about it. And I knew they were exceptional people, but now that I'm trying to build that habit myself and like really having to be, okay, I have to carve out time for this. I'm, booking my workout classes. I have to think about what workouts am I doing? Like there's so much that goes into it that I'm like, wow, these people who work out every day are exceptional. And I also want to note too that it isn't necessarily about how you do the thing, like not every consistent action that you take to become exceptional has to be of such insane intensity. It's more so to me about the consistency and how those things compound. For example, there's this guy who made a video saying that the hook of the video, he's like, running a 12-minute mile is not normal. He said like exercising a couple times a week or something isn't normal. He said what's normal is doing nothing, because most Americans do nothing. They don't exercise. Again, they exercise less than 20 minutes per day. And it's just like, we get so fixated on doing it. Oh, well, I'm running a 12-minute mile. That's not enough. It's like, no, still do it. Because if your goal is to become exceptional, and let's say you want to be a really fast runner, or you want to be someone who is really fit like I am, or I want to be. I mean, if I don't show up at the beginning, then it's like, where does that even get me? But that's the time when it's hard. Like being exceptional is hard because you have to show up through all of that. And I think we kind of forget that.
Yeah. And I think back to what you just said, it's not normal. And I think people kind of get hyper fixated on it's not normal and think that they either don't have to strive for it or shouldn't strive for it, or kind of like put themselves down for striving for it because they're like, well, it's not normal. I shouldn't have to do that because it's not normal. But again, back to the statistics of the average American, is that what you're striving for? Are you striving for normal? I feel like if you're listening to this podcast, you're absolutely not striving for normal. You're literally listening to a self-development, like personal development podcast right now. Like, you're not striving for normal. So these things they do take work, and it's going to inevitably make you not normal, which is a good thing.
Yes. And we were having a conversation too earlier, like off camera, about how neither of us are, you know, proponents for hustle culture in the sense of like run yourself into the ground. Neither of us are saying to sacrifice your health and end up with, you know, long-term health issues because you pushed yourself way too hard. However, I feel like we have gone a little too far. Like, the pendulum swings with all of these types of things on social media, but the pendulum is kind of swung to a point with hustle culture where it's so anti-hustle at all. And I think that if you want to be exceptional, we need to reframe that. Being exceptional is going to take significant effort. That does not mean effort that you have to run yourself into the ground and fall apart, but it does mean significant effort. And that might mean that for a season, you're working a lot more than you would in another season, or you're working more than ideal, or you're going to more networking events than you would want to be at, and you don't want to have all this small talk, but that's what you need to do right now. Or you're taking on extra projects at work that you are like, I'm not really getting paid more for this, but I know that if I take these on, I'm going to learn a lot and I can move up to a different position that I want, whatever it may be. Or even with the gym, like right now with me trying to get back into going to the gym, I am having to find other areas that I can sacrifice. Okay, yeah, I'm not getting to, you know, relax as much at the end of the day because I'm spending time at the gym. Or, okay, I need to find some better systems to keep, you know, take better care of my house if I'm going to take more time to be adding this onto my schedule and on top of my social schedule. Like, that is just part of becoming exceptional. And I think we can't, it's just part of it. Don't run yourself into the ground, but you kind of have to put effort in.
I also think, and obviously when we're talking about, you know, hustle culture versus anti-hustle culture, especially when we see it on social media, I think obviously there's merit to both sides. Like you just said, we don't want to run ourselves into the ground. But I think on the flip side, so many people avoid taking any action at all because they're afraid of burnout. They're like, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want to quote unquote hustle because I don't want to burn out. I don't want to spend my weekends posting on social media, even though deep down I really want to be a content creator, because if I work 7 days a week, I'm going to burn out. I've been a content creator for 4 years and I can still say to this day, I work way more weekends than I don't work. Like, it's very rare that there's a weekend that goes by that I don't do anything. Actually, I can't remember the last one. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think that a lot of people, they don't even end up trying because they're like, well, I saw on social media that if I hustle, if I like go into this kind of hustle culture mindset, that I'm going to quote unquote burn out. You have so much energy. You do. Like, you really do. Especially if you're listening to this and you're in your 20s, you are never going to have as much free time and energy as you do right now. So like, take advantage of it. We also talk all the time on this podcast how doing things that actually excite you and light you up give you energy. It's not always the case that you need to do less, you're doing too much. If you're doing things that you love, it actually gives you energy, and you have so much energy to go after the things that you want. So use that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. You want to read us?
Yeah, I think this goes into lesson number 2. This lesson is all about your habits. And it's the lesson that compound interest works in every aspect of your life, not just your money. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you remember we used to talk all about money on this podcast. We used to be Girls Talk Money. And every single week we would be talking about this topic of compound interest and letting your money grow over time. And we always talk about compound interest in terms of your finances, how investing small amounts of money grows exponentially over time. But I feel like we don't talk enough about how this principle actually really does apply to every single aspect of your life, like your habits, your relationships, your skills, your health. And the other day I actually heard probably on TikTok or something. This idea of living a high ROI life, and I like can't get it out of my head. I just love this idea so much. And it's all about how the tiny things that you do today compound into your dream life over time. And I think that we tend to discount those small things. We kind of think that they don't matter. They're the things that we don't see immediate results from, like journaling every day or making your bed, or, you know, even just doing a consistent skincare routine. They seem like they don't matter, but over time they really compound into living your dream life. Some examples that we have here are reading for 20 minutes a day adds up to 50 to 60 books per year. Learning a new skill for 18 minutes per day costs you minimal time daily, but it adds up to 100 hours of skill development by the end of the year. And if you get better, 1% better every single day, you'll end up 37% better by the end of the year, which is actually crazy to think about because, again, when we're talking about this idea of being exceptional and going after what we want and striving for more than average, the little things you tend to overlook and you feel like they don't matter. You feel like they're not really adding up to anything by the end of the year, but it actually is insane how much those little things really do add up.
Yes, I feel like I see this a lot in my personal life too. Of course, I can watch my, my investments grow and things like that, and I can see, but in my personal life, I've seen that a lot where I've been journaling every single day. I have not missed a single day in, it's probably been almost 3 full years, maybe 3.5 years. And I remember I would journal every day, write down my thoughts, and then just brain dump. And then I would write down affirmations, and then I would say the affirmations out loud. And I've definitely told the story before on the podcast, but when I first started doing them, I thought affirmations were stupid. I was like, this is dumb. I don't want to look in the mirror or even just talk to myself and be like, I am enough. I am whatever. It just felt so cheesy to me. And I was like, this is dumb. And my therapist was like, no, you should really do it. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I'll do it for, I don't remember how many days I said, maybe 30 days or something. And I'll see. And if I don't notice a difference, I'm just going to forget about it. Or if it doesn't get easier. The first week, it was like the most uncomfortable experience of my life. It felt like I could feel my skin crawling as I say them. And then over time, it got a lot easier to actually say the affirmation. So I said, okay, I'll keep doing it. I'll keep going with it. And it was funny because, a few months down the line, I think it was probably 3 months in to doing them every day, I started to notice how the affirmations I was working on, I wasn't finding insecurity around those things anymore. Let's just say it was, I am enough, right? Was my affirmation. I was starting to actually notice that when I was like on social media, I wasn't as worried about people's opinions of me. Or if I was dating, I wasn't going into the date being like, I wonder what he thinks of me. I was like, what do I think of him? Let me go in there confident and think about what I think of him. And you really start to see the compounding effects of those. And now that I've been doing it for 3 years, the affirmations I do today are so different. Like I can look back on my old journals and see how different it is because they work, because I committed to doing the consistent thing every single day, but you're not going to see it immediately, And I think also too, there's this beautiful, I was actually talking to my Lyft driver about this the other day on my way to the hotel, but we were talking about how it's like the older you get and the more you work on yourself or, things in your life, how much they really compound each other and how much better life gets. And we were talking about how each time, like, it's like a ladder, right? Where, you start on the first rung and you're like, okay, I'm going to commit to this habit. You get yourself to the second rung and you see life from a new perspective on that second rung because now you're higher up, you see different things. Then you get to the third one and now you see it again, you're seeing more of it. And then just imagine when you get to the top, how much the wisdom has compounded on itself to where now you're at the top of the ladder and you're looking out and think of all the things you can see from the top of the ladder versus the bottom because you committed to just going up one at a time. And that really, like, your life just feels so much better when you let the things compound.
I totally agree. And back to what you were saying about the affirmations, years ago when you were doing the affirmation that you are enough, okay, you no longer have to work on that. You're enough. So the affirmation that you do after that is so much more, I don't want to say niche, but it's so much, you can really get to the root of these smaller things that can actually optimize your life more because you already did those kind of like baseline affirmations that make you feel like you're enough. That's what we mean by they're compounding on top of each other. I think about this too with like continuous learning. I think that that's so important when we're talking about, being exceptional and going after what you want and living this big, full dream life. for a lot of people, they'll say, okay, well, I don't have time to listen to an hour-long podcast. Okay, commit to it for 10 minutes a day, because you're going to learn something in those 10 minutes that when you click onto a different podcast episode the next day, what you learned on the first day, those start to compound on top of each other. Earlier this year, I really wanted to commit to being better about continuous learning and just like making it a daily practice. And I started a notes app in my phone. And every single day when I would listen to a podcast episode, I would write down one lesson that I learned from each of them. And it's crazy how those little things compound on top of each other, because you're learning these little kind of nuggets that you're putting into your life, and all of those creative inputs are being ingested. You're learning so much from 10 minutes a day. I also think about this with walking. Like, walking is obviously such a good habit. And when we're talking about fitness, I walk Bella for 10 minutes in the morning every day. I don't even think about it because I obviously have to do it for her. The amount of steps that I've taken over the course of Bella's life from those little 10-minute walks adds up so much over time.
Yes.
So this can be applied to any. I think about when we're talking about fitness as well, we kind of get discouraged by, you know, if you show up and you like don't have an amazing workout, you know, maybe you're a little tired, you only get 30 to 40 minutes in and it's not your best workout. Okay, it's 30 to 40 minutes. That compounds so much over time. The amount of workouts that I do that are 30 to 40 minutes long and I leave feeling like, that was an okay workout, it wasn't amazing, it's still compounding so much over time. I feel like I have such a good baseline level of muscle and strength because I'm doing these 30 to 40 minute workouts even when I don't feel like doing it. So don't discount the small things.
Yeah. And I think it changes too how you view things at that next level. Like, once you, for example, going to your first workout class, I remember the first time I go to Legree a lot and I love Legree, but the first time you show up to any sort of like Reformer Pilates, Legree, whatever it is, you're looking at that machine, like, what the actual heck is this thing? And they're getting you oriented to it and you're low-key confused the entire class because they're like, reverse saw, and you're like, what even is that? You know, like, that's just part of it. But then you think about, okay, you leave that class having learned something. So now you come into the next class with a little bit more confidence, a little bit more readiness, a little bit more strength. And then you think about each time how much that does and mentally what that does for you. Like, I don't know, even just with the affirmations and stuff, the way that I view, like, when I see, okay, I'm feeling insecure or off about something, I should practice an affirmation about that. That's my first reaction. Like, oh, I should practice an affirmation about that. I'm not sitting in it, reeling in it, being like, oh, like, why do I feel that way? That's what I would have done in the past. But now, because I've been practicing affirmations for so long, the decision that I make when I notice myself feeling insecure, like, my default is to go towards the healthy solution, not the spiraling. And I think that you can apply that to all different domains. But I wanted to talk a little bit too about this kind of like forming a habit and showing up and doing these consistent things, and why they're hard for people to stick to. And I thought this was really fascinating. But in habit building, there is this period of time called the Valley of Disappointment, which is the time between when you start trying to build a habit and when you start to see the results of it. The reality is you often don't see any impact of your efforts in the beginning, like, at all. And it only becomes apparent after you've shown up a bit. And it's why we let bad habits slide so easily, because we think, oh, it's just one thing. It's not going to become a big thing. We don't see the compounding effects of letting those bad habits slide until we have that, oh crap moment. And we're like, oh, you know, I have not gone to the gym in a long time. Oh, I said I should drink more water. I have not committed to that. I haven't called my mom in a long time. Like, we let those things go. But if you can commit to showing up during the Valley of Disappointment all the way through that, and you push through that Valley of Disappointment, when you actually look at the growth chart of habit formation, right after that Valley of Disappointment, it literally goes up, like, straight up. And that's what we expect at the beginning of building habits is, okay, it's a little hard. And then after a week, boom, it goes up. There's actually that stat too that apparently it's like been debunked that it takes 21 days to build a new habit. Apparently it is significantly longer. I think it was like anywhere from 60 to like 300 days, like a very wide range, but 21 is not accurate. So I think mentally we think, okay, I'm going to do a habit for 21 days. It's going to become easy. Then it's going to become this like hockey stick upward growth. That's not realistic. It actually kind of swoops down a little bit into that Valley of Disappointment and then it shoots up. So you have to commit to like pushing through that. And if you can, that's when you'll see the compounding effects.
I also think that yeah, when we're talking about building a habit and making sure we're doing this over the long term, fitness is a really good example of this too, because I think a lot of people struggle with building the habit of getting into a consistent fitness routine. And I think for a lot of people, I've definitely struggled with this in the past, where you're doing it for the immediate gain, quote unquote, and not so much for the long-term benefit of it. You know, if you haven't been in a consistent fitness routine for a while, you might not feel the best about yourself physically or mentally. So you're in the gym being like, okay, I'm here because tomorrow I want to look better, or tomorrow I want to feel better about my body, or just feel better mentally. It doesn't work like that. And it's so disappointing to go into the gym with that mindset, because the whole time you're sitting there going, I don't feel great, and I know that tomorrow I'm not going to feel great because of this workout. So really learning how to shift your mindset around that and say, I'm not doing this for the gain tomorrow, or because I know I'm going to feel better tomorrow. I'm doing this because I know over the long term this is going to get me to where I want to be and how I want to feel on a daily basis. And that's the point of it. I think with so many habits, the trick is to give yourself that defined period of time that you are going to stick to, and show up for yourself for that defined period of time, and don't let yourself get off track with it. And then just see what the results are at the end. I know I've talked about this before on the podcast, but when I started my TikTok account, that's exactly what I did. I said, I'm going to stay consistent with this for 60 days. I'm posting 3 times a day for 60 days, and I'm just going to see what happens. And at the end of those 60 days, I had 50,000 followers, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. But if I would have went into it saying, okay, I'm just going to post and see what happens, and after week 1, it didn't go anywhere, I didn't have any followers, I wasn't bringing in all the money, I probably would have stopped with it. But I said, no, I'm going to wait until the 60-day mark, and if not, I can give up. And I remember when I made that promise to myself, I literally said, I was like, I'm so bad at sticking with things, I'm doing this for 60 days. Like, that was my reasoning behind it, because before that, I would never follow through with anything. I would start something, a week later I would get bored with it. So I said, I'm sticking with it for 60 days, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life.
Yeah. When I was researching for this episode, and forgive me if I didn't write the stat down, and I should have, but I believe it was talking about how using a habit tracker, or some way to track the habits that you want to commit to, whatever those daily actions are, using a habit tracker, I think it said it makes you around like 65% more likely to follow through with the habit, which is an insane stat.
Yeah.
And don't quote me on that exact number. I think it was 65%, but that is every time I want to reset my habits, I have a little habit tracker that I made that I print out, and I hang it on my fridge, and I track my habits. And I swear to you, it truly, it makes it like a game to me. It reminds me of when you were a kid and you would get the little, like, this probably sounds so bad, when you were in school and you could either be like red, yellow, or green. It was like, if you're red, like you had bad behavior that day. Green was like good. Like,
no, I didn't have that.
Or like a chore chart where you'd get like a star every time you get to do your chores or whatever. Like those kind of things. It reminds me of that. There is something so satisfying about coloring in the bubble on the habits that I did every day. And when I remember I used to do it with like tracking my water intake and moving my body and whatever. And I would stand there in my kitchen at 9 p.m. and chug the remainder of the water I was supposed to drink that day before I went to bed without coloring that bubble in, because it becomes a visual reminder of your commitment to yourself. And I think that's really powerful to be like, no, I said I'm going to do this, and I see that I committed to it for 60 days, and I know I'm going to hit that valley of disappointment. And I'm the kind of person who is still going to show up for myself and is still going to push through, and making that decision. And that habit tracker becomes a visual reminder of that. And I think it is so powerful. And yeah, I think the stat is 65% more likely to follow through. So like, that's another really great tactic to deploy.
And that is such a good point, because back to what the overarching lesson is, it's that compound interest works on every aspect of your life, not just your money. It's not about the habit that you want to build around taking your supplements consistently. That's something that I've been trying to do for months, and I so do not have the habit built. I need a habit tracker. I don't have the habit built of taking I don't take my supplements consistently, maybe like a couple times a week. But it's not just about the health benefit that's going to come from the supplements. It's about saying or doing what you say you're going to do. They say confidence comes from showing up for yourself and doing what you say you're going to do. So if I say, I want to take my supplements consistently, and then I don't, okay, what does that say about me? What does that say about, if I can't keep the promises that I make to myself, how am I going to get to where I want to be in my life. It's not just about the supplements itself. And I think the quote that we said a little bit earlier about if you get 1% better every day, you'll end up being 37% better by the end of the year. That is so crazy to put into perspective too, because it is those small little things that compound into such big things over time. And obviously this entire podcast is about building your dream life and having a life that you truly, truly love. And it really is those small mundane things that don't seem important that actually do put you into the best version of yourself.
Yeah, it's like, don't discount those small efforts, you know? It's just, I think about the way we show up for other people too, in small ways, you know, when someone like mails you a card or someone buys you a coffee or those little things, and you think about the joy that it brings you and how it shows you that, oh yeah, someone really cares about me. It's like, they probably only bought you an $8 coffee. It's not like they went and, you know, I don't know, built you a house overnight type of thing, but that small thing meant so much to you coming from somebody else. Like, how can you commit to those things, you know, for yourself? Because it does compound over time.
Definitely. Okay, let's get into the third one. I love this one so much because I am such a proponent of it. I always have been. Really, my entire 20s is like summarized by this lesson, I think. And you've definitely gotten so much better about this over time. I hope I influenced you. I hope I did. Okay, this lesson is, don't waste time trying to make the right decision. Focus on making a decision and then making that decision right. So this lesson is all about not only decision making, but I think just trusting your intuition and making a decision quick enough to actually just take action on it, see what happens, iterate, and then move on. I think we waste so much time, especially in our 20s, trying to be perfect, waiting until we have all of the answers, waiting until we know exactly what we're going to do before we take any action at all. And that is so not how the world operates. I read a book a couple of years ago. It's called The Originals. It's by a psychologist named Adam Grant. And he found that the most successful people also produce the most failures. So a couple of examples here. Shakespeare wrote more plays than almost any playwright of his era. Most of them you've never heard of because they weren't successful. Picasso is known for a few paintings, but he has created an estimated 50,000 works of art over his lifetime, most of them going nowhere. Thomas Edison, when he was discovering the light bulb, he tested over 6,000 materials for it. And when someone asked him, you know, how does he feel about that? He said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that it won't work. I think we get so caught up on, you know, if we don't know exactly where we're going, we're not going anywhere at all. So we don't take any action. But the most successful people are the people that failed the most. They took the most action because it led them closer to the right action.
Mm-hmm. Even just trying the most. Like, I just think that and this lesson is a quote too from a researcher named Ellen Langer, I think is how you say her last name. And she did a podcast interview a few years ago, and this quote that she said about, you know, we stop trying to make the right decision and focus on making a decision and making that decision right. It went viral, and that's where I originally heard it from. And I assume she's the one who like really coined that statement, but she would talk a lot about how, as I think she works at Harvard, she would talk a lot about how students would come to her and they would say, you know, I was accepted into both Harvard and Yale, and I just regret choosing Harvard. I wish that I went with Yale. And she would say, well, why is that? And they would say, well, I just think I would have liked Yale better. And she would say, well, there it is. Your regret about your decision is based on your perception that you would have liked the other option more, when in reality, you made a choice. You made the choice to come to Harvard because your perception was that you would enjoy that more. So who's to say that your new perception that you would have liked Yale more is accurate anyways? You could go to Yale and you could not even like it at all, even less than you like Harvard. And so we have this mindset around the choices that we make and regret and perception that another choice is going to be perfect if we just get more information or if we just, figure out a different way to think about it. And it's just so false. Like you said, you're never going to have all the information. There's this book that I read, and I've read it, I think twice now, and it's made me cry every time, but I really think it's a book that I think genuinely everyone should read. It gave me so much perspective on life when I read it 3 years ago, and it's called 30 Lessons for Living. And essentially the author surveyed over 1,200 older people to figure out their biggest regrets in life. And a top regret of elders, right? These are people in the final chapter of their life. One of their top regrets was spending too much time worrying. And 85% of those surveyed said focusing on others' opinions of themselves was a waste of time and a significant regret. And essentially what the book goes on to say in that chapter is just essentially the essence of this lesson. We can sit in worry and fear about the choice and try to make the right one by going in circles over and over and over again, worrying about, is it the right thing? What will other people think about it? How do I know it's the right move? Or we can just make a decision and we can get to that point and say, okay, now I'm here, I'm going to make that decision right. And we've talked a lot about this, like personally with moving, because we both have moved out of state from where we're from. And that's the mindset that I went into moving with. I said, you know what? I moved from Massachusetts to St. Pete, Florida. I have no idea if I'm going to love it. I don't know. I know that I like it right now, but I don't know if I'm going to love it until I move there. So and I looked at 6 different cities before I moved, and I just was like, I'm just going to pick one. And I went into it thinking, I'm going to get there. And then once I get there, I'm going to do everything in my power to make that the right choice. I'm going to seek out community that I want to be around. I'm going to find routines and habits that make me like it. I'm going to live in an apartment that I like. I'm going to, just try to like meet new people, find friends, try cool coffee shops, do everything I can to make that choice right. And I think that often puts us in a much better position than when we try to operate from perfection all the time. We're worrying about, is this the perfect decision? How can I get more information? Let me ask what so-and-so thinks. Let me ask what this person thinks. You worry about it so much. And it's like, what's the point?
You're never going to know until you do it. I feel like I have a million examples of this from just my 20s alone, and I'm only 26. And my life is what it is today because of all of those things, whether they panned out or not. Even when I moved in with an ex-boyfriend, that went up in flames. Am I where I am today because of that decision? Yes. Like you kind of just have to operate in a way of saying, I'm 51% sure that this is a good choice. I'm going after it. Even when we started this podcast, I think that's a very, very good example of this. That was 3 years ago. We had no idea what we were doing. We knew nothing about podcasts. We knew nothing about microphones, equipment, anything. We picked a name kind of on a whim. We were like, let's just get started. We absolutely did not have all the answers. We didn't have a long-term plan. We didn't have a monetization plan. We had no idea how or if we would ever make money from it, but we were like, let's just get started. And doing that allowed us to be where we are today, where we're filming in this beautiful, beautiful setup, and we have a ton of engaged listeners, and we really hit our stride with podcasting, and things are going really well for us 3 years later because we took action without having all of the answers. And I think that's so important. I think another thing going off of this, when we're talking about the most successful people are the ones that take the most action or take action quickly enough to test it and iterate it. I heard this a couple of weeks ago, and it said, start treating your decisions like venture capital. And if you're not familiar with the venture capital world, venture capitals invest in startups, right? And a venture capitalist will probably invest in, let's say, 100 startups. They expect 70 of those 100 startups to fail, but they are expecting that 5 to 10 of them will become successful companies, which will carry their entire portfolio, meaning they'll make their money back and they're going to make a ton of money on those 5 to 10 successful companies. And I think that puts it into such good perspective around make 100 decisions, only 5 to 10 of them have to be good, but you have to make 100 decisions to get to the 10 or 5 to 10 of them that are going to become successful decisions.
Yes. I also know, statistically speaking, people tend to regret the things they didn't do more than the things that they did. Like oftentimes people don't look back, like the venture capitalists, they don't look back as often and say, I wish I didn't invest in, or I wish I didn't invest in this company. They're usually looking at the big companies that blew up saying, I wish I invested in that one. That's where their regrets tend to come from. And to put some numbers behind it, Studies show that 69% to 84% of people report greater regret for things they didn't do than things they did do. And also, regret from inaction lasts significantly longer than regret from action. Like, people hold on to the regret from things they didn't do longer than from things they did. And I forget what the exact stat was on regretting things they did do, but it kind of said something along the lines of like, it's usually days, weeks, months. But people regret inaction like months to years, which is so interesting because like when you really think about it, oh yeah, if you I don't know, get into a relationship and then, you end the relationship, shortly after, and you're like, oh, like I really regret doing that. Eventually that regret fades on like when it's a momentary thing. Of course, if it's a catastrophic, huge event that you regret doing, okay, of course. But even moving to a new city, okay, maybe I regret moving to the apartment that I did or something like that. Eventually that will fade. But can I be in my 40s, 50s, 60s and say, wow, you know what? I never got to travel where I wanted to. Or I always wanted to live in another city when I was young and I never did. That regret from inaction, I think that would haunt me, And it does. Statistically speaking, it does haunt people. And so I think we have to remember and like put that in perspective that we will regret the things we didn't do more than things we did do. So we have to just start taking that action, not worrying about making the right, quote unquote, right choice, whatever that even means, and just make a choice, do something and iterate. Like you said with the podcast, when we started, I distinctly remember conversations where we were like, oh no, we'll just start and we can just iterate. Like this episode's gonna be bad. It's fine. We'll just put it out there and we can iterate from there. We would say, let's just get these cheap mics to start. We can iterate. That was something that we've always talked about. And we have. We've had three different mics that we use at home. We're on our third one. We've improved each time. We just figured out how to connect our phones to like our little podcast recording software so that we can get better quality. But we iterated. We used to film on our webcams in poor lighting. I was in my parents' living room. Like we didn't have a great setup, but we were like, let's take action and iterate over time. And eventually it will get better and better.
Absolutely. And I think this transitions us so well to our fourth lesson, which is you absolutely have to get comfortable with risk, especially in your 20s. And I think whatever age you're listening to this still applies, but especially when you're young and have no dependence. I would say most people listening to this probably have no dependence. Especially if you're like in your early 20s, you're never going to have more free time. You're never going to have more energy. You're never going to have less dependence than you do right now. You have to get comfortable with taking risk. That's going to put you far ahead and that's going to get you where you want to be. I think about this all the time with real estate investing, which is not something that I do. It's not something that you do yet. It's something that we might get into at some point. But it's something that I was very interested in learning about in my early 20s because I was very into the whole financial independence. I really wanted to build wealth for myself. And a lot of people were using real estate as a way to do that. And there's inherently so much risk in that, right? Especially for like a 21-year-old, you're sitting there going, what if I invest in this house and then everything breaks and I get into so much debt and blah, blah, blah. There's inherently risk. But there's risk with anything that has a reward at the end of it. And you do at some point just have to get comfortable with the risk. And I think framing your mindset to, yes, it's risky. Yes, things might not go the way I intend it, but I'm going to learn so much through that process that's going to propel me into the next thing that I do. Even if you invest in real estate, you don't make that much money from it. You don't really turn a profit. It's way harder than you expected it to be. You're still going to learn so many things from doing that that's going to take you into your next path. That might even propel you into your next path. You don't know the people that you're going to meet. You don't know the lessons that you're going to learn, the business ideas that are going to come from that. You don't know, but you have to get comfortable taking risk in order to do that. I think about this too with taking the leap to quit my full-time job to be a full-time content creator. That's inherently risky, but there's risk with anything that has a reward at the end of it. And here I am 3 years later and it worked out and I trusted the process. It propelled me into so many different things that I had no idea. I didn't know what I was going to do long-term when I quit my full-time job to be a content creator, but here I am 3 years later. So getting comfortable with risk is so important.
A couple of years ago, my accountant he said something to me along the lines of every decision has risk. Some we just don't really see. And it shifted so much. I obviously had asked him a question about business and where I was keeping money in the business versus in personal and all these things. But he's like, I need you to get it out of your head that there is a decision that does not have risk. And I kind of was like, wait a second, what do you mean by that? And he was like, every single decision has risk, whether you acknowledge it or not. And it really shifted how I think about things, because there might be a risk with a decision that you make, but there's also a risk with staying exactly where you are. And that always motivates me, right? You know, if you are, let's say, you know, you want to move to a new city, there's the risk of potentially not enjoying it. But what's the risk of you staying where you are? Wondering for the rest of your life what it would be like to move to the city that you've always wanted to move to. I don't know that I want to play around with that risk, you know, or I know that, you know, in your 20s and your 30s and beyond, of course, but I think it starts to become more top of mind in our 20s is committing to a relationship. And you're like, okay, I'm going to pick my person that I'm going to be with forever. And sometimes we don't even understand it or perceive it as risk, but you are risking having to be vulnerable and trust someone else with your feelings. And sometimes that becomes like, okay, that feels really risky. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of commitment, or the risk of quote unquote committing to one person forever and, you know, there being someone else better for you. It's like, okay, well, what's the risk of not taking that leap and staying where you are? You know, you have to think about that side of it too. Or if you want to learn a new skill, the risk of not enjoying it or wasting time on something that you might not use. Okay, well, what's the risk of never exploring that thing that you're interested in? What if it unlocks something that is so much bigger? Like, there is risk involved in everything, every single decision, whether you stay where you are or where you're not, or where you want to go, I mean. And I think that if you can just get comfortable with the concept of risk, it can really like propel you forward when you start to make choices, because you're able to assess the risk better. And also too, I want to note that risk does not mean being reckless and irresponsible and being like, yeah, I have $10 in my bank account, I'm gonna go move to a new city. That's incredibly risky. And if your risk tolerance aligns with that, go ahead. I couldn't do it, but like, go ahead, you know. But I am a big calculated risk person, which is just like assessing the probability of success and failure before I take action. So I'm thinking through things. I'm thinking, okay, if I move to a new city, how is this likely to go? Let me really look at this. Let me run the numbers and see what is it going to take for me to move there. Where does that leave me financially? What does that all look like? And then I assess the risk. Is the risk of this worth it? Yes or no? Again, I'm not going to be the person who moves to a new city with $10 in my bank account. That, to me, I'm like, okay, calculated risk, red flags on that one, right? But that's how I view risk. I'm not like a just go be reckless, but I will think through it. And I think that's fair too.
I absolutely think I'm moderately risk averse when it comes to this. We were having this conversation earlier today about kind of the financial threshold that makes you feel secure. And this is going to be so different for everybody. There are some people that feel totally secure with $1,000 in their savings account and like just spending their paycheck outside of that. When I quit my job to become a full-time content creator, I made sure that I had zero consumer debt before I did that. I was like, I'm not quitting my corporate job until I paid off my car loan and paid off my student loans, which was about $50,000 of debt at the time. I was like, I'm not doing it with debt. That just made me feel secure. That made me feel like the risk was worth the reward, despite I was making over double my corporate salary from content creation at the time. But I still wanted to make sure my financial foundation was secure before I did that. So I do think that there's a way to, like you just said, take those calculated risks without being impulsive or blowing up your entire situation. But at some point you do have to look at the scenario and say, really, what's the worst case scenario that's going to happen from this? We talk about this on the podcast all the time, but getting comfortable with risk by thinking about it between the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely scenario. I think you talked about this on the podcast.
Taught me about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Your therapist. That is such a good framework for people in their 20s. What is the worst case scenario that could possibly happen if
Yes.
you make the decision that you want to do, whether it be move to a new state. Okay, worst case scenario, you hate it, or worst case scenario, you put yourself out financially and you're broke. What's the
Yes.
most likely scenario?
Yes.
Realistically, you're going to make friends, you're going to still have your job.
Yes.
You're still going to, you can move home a year later if you hate it. That's the most likely
Yes.
scenario.
And my therapist would always tell me to like really get descriptive when you're thinking about the best, worst, and most likely, because you want to allow your brain, when you do the exercise, to go to the lengths that your brain is going to. Like, don't, you know, when people journal and then you stop yourself because you're like, oh, that sounds dramatic. It's like, no, like actually write it down. Like, you're the only one
I do
reading
that all
it.
the time.
Oh, me too.
Nobody's reading your
I'm like,
journal.
Grace, no one is reading this. Like, just actually put your thoughts on the page. But you want to do the same thing with this exercise, because what you'll find, like when you, let's say, using the example of moving to a new city, it's like, best case scenario, I move there. I love it so much. I feel just like so overwhelmed with joy all the time. My day-to-day is great. My habits then improve as a result. My routines improve as a result. I find amazing community. I love my job. I love my day-to-day. I end up being so successful. I'm so happy. I meet my husband. Whatever, right? It's like, when you really think, it's like, wow, okay, best. That's really, really, really beautiful. Okay. Now what's my worst case scenario? Where would my mind go when I'm about to move? Okay, I hate it. I'm so unhappy every single day. My health starts to deteriorate as a result of it. I make no friends. I hate my apartment. I feel unsafe. I feel unwell. I want to move back. I break my lease and I move home. It's like, okay, I let my brain travel to all of those things. And what ends up happening every single time I do it is I write down the worst case scenario and I realize, okay, whoa, my brain is 100% catastrophizing. Knowing myself, and this is where like I really take this exercise and it really helps me, is knowing myself. I consider myself pretty self-aware, and I would assume a lot of people listening to this podcast are very self-aware. Again, if you're watching or listening to a self-help podcast, but like when really, really genuinely think about how you pay attention to your own, like to yourself, to how you feel, to what your routines look like, to, you know, how you're surrounding yourself with community. Think about how you pay attention to it in your current life. Would you allow your life to get to the point where that worst case scenario happens? Probably not, right? Like you would probably, let's say you move to a new city, and I went through this when I was, you know, going to be moving to a new city a little over a year ago. I'm like, okay, what are the odds that I actually allow myself to slip into a place where my habits are so horrible that my health starts to deteriorate rapidly? I stop leaving the house and I have no friends. That would have to be extenuating circumstances, you know? That's really not that likely. And also then when you look at the worst case scenario, you say, okay, worst case scenario, I move there, I hate it. I break my lease and I move home. Does that suck? Yes. Is there a financial cost to that? Yes. That's not fun. However, is that something I could cope with? Asking yourself, can I cope with the worst case scenario? Yeah, I could cope with that easily. It'd be really upsetting, like, hey, that sucks. I have to pay 2 months of rent and break my lease. I can cope with that. So then when you realize best case scenario actually sounds beautiful, worst case really would have to be extenuating circumstances, and I'm equipped to make sure I don't get there, and I'm equipped to cope with it if I face it. It basically dismantles the worst case scenario in your brain. And then you go, okay, what's the most likely? Maybe a mix of it. Maybe I struggle to find friends a little bit in the beginning. I find them after a couple months. I develop a great community. I like my apartment. I love certain aspects. Some parts I'm like, hey, we could use more chairs at the pool, you know, like things like that. And then you think, now I'm looking at these 3 buckets. 2 of them sound actually pretty dang good. And 1 sounds horrible, but really far off, and something that, again, I'm equipped to handle. And it totally like dismantles risk in the way that you make decisions. And I think that going back to this lesson of like the past 2 lessons, this one and the last one, about how we make choices and how we think about risk, it just really puts things into perspective for you.
I also think when we're talking about gauging risk in our minds, removing sunk costs from the risk equation is so important, because they actually don't matter. I think me moving to Nashville is such a good example of this, because as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I moved to Nashville and then moved home a year later, largely because of a boy, but no, it's okay. But I spent a lot of money to break my lease in Pittsburgh to move to Nashville. I spent a lot of money. I had to pay 2 months of rent, and I think there was also like a little concession fee on top of it. So I spent a good probably $6,000 to break my lease, moved to Nashville. Okay, well then I'm in a long distance relationship with a guy back in Pittsburgh, and I realize I only want to be in Nashville for 1 year. Okay, have to spend all of the money to move back to Pittsburgh. I can't think about the sunk cost of me breaking my lease in Pittsburgh to move to Nashville when I'm gauging whether or not moving back to Pittsburgh is the right situation. And there's risk in that decision. There's risk that I move back to Pittsburgh and then Alex breaks up with me and then I'm back to square one, moving back to Nashville. No, I'm just kidding. I love my house. I love being back in Pittsburgh. But there's risk in every decision. You have to remove the sunk costs out of it because they actually simply don't matter. I also think when we're talking about this idea of risk with decision making, it's so important to remove the idea of the risk of wasting time. I cannot stand that. And I think so many people struggle with it. You don't take action because you are afraid that if it doesn't work out, you wasted your time by spending the time on it. One really good example of this is before I started posting on TikTok, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, I thought I wanted to be a blogger. That was like kind of a little popular back then because TikTok was like just getting off the ground, like people were still blogging, and I really thought I wanted to be a blogger. And I spent a good 6 months learning about blogging, starting a website. There were setup costs to purchase a domain. I'm sitting there like designing my little website on WordPress. I'm doing so much research, watching so many YouTube videos. I remember I was traveling for work at the time a ton. And I would spend all of my nights sitting in my hotel room watching YouTube videos on how to blog. And then after 3 months, I realized I hated it and I deleted the account and I never went back to it. And you can sit there and say, okay, well, I'm afraid to try blogging because if it doesn't work out, I just wasted months of my life learning how to do it, learning the skills. But then months later, I started posting on TikTok and not even realizing that the things that I was learning by trying to become a blogger, I could apply to TikTok, affiliate marketing, social media marketing, all of that. So you don't even realize the lessons you're going to learn from the things that you're trying to do, and it's never actually wasted time. But you have to remove this idea of, well, I don't want to try because there's a risk of wasting time.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I was in this Facebook group for people in their 20s. I think it blew up during like COVID or right when I was graduating college. And I remember someone was in their late 20s, and in the Facebook group, they asked something along the lines of, you know, I'm in my late 20s and I'm debating going back to school to get another degree, but I kind of feel like I'm getting older. Like it just feels like, is this going to be a waste of my time? And someone commented back and they said, you're going to be 30 regardless. Would you rather be 30 with the degree or 30 without? And I was like, dang, okay, that really puts things in perspective. Like, or even if you do something and let's say it doesn't work out, let's say you go and you get another degree and then you decide you hate it and you don't want to use it. Okay, well now you're 30 with the degree and learning that you don't want to do it. Like with my college degree, I double majored in urban studies and human rights, and I minored in social justice organizing. I went into college. I wanted to own my own nonprofit serving people experiencing homelessness. I decided like 2 years into school, that wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. I pivoted to wanting to be a human rights lawyer. I literally I studied for the LSAT. If you've ever studied for that or taken it, it's horrible. Like it's such a terrible process and so hard. But I was studying for that constantly amid having 3 internships and 3 jobs at the same time. It was the busiest, like one of the hardest seasons of my life. I took the LSAT. I go to apply to law school and I decide I actually don't want to do this. I was like, I don't want to do that at all. I could sit there and say, well, because I invested all this time in taking the LSAT and I paid for this degree and I did all this stuff, I should just do it. I should go to law school. I should take on more debt and just, no. What is the point of doing that? Yes, I committed and I learned all these things and spent all this time, and I came out on the other end, decided to not use it in the way that it was intended to be used, and my life continued to go forward. And instead of me being, 6 months down the line applying for law school, I was 6 months down the line with the learning that was not what I wanted to do, and I just saved myself so much time and money by just taking that learning and being like, yeah, I'm not going to look at the sunk costs. I'm just going to say, it wasn't a waste of time because I gained the knowledge that that's not what I want to do. And I think that's how we have to look at a lot of these things in life.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us into our next point on this idea of literally do whatever you want to do and take action and make decisions and go after whatever you want, because that's the only way that you're going to end up at your dream life and that life that you actually love. And this lesson has been so important in my 20s. It's learning that everyone is the main character of their own story and no one's really thinking about you at all, or even remotely as much as you think they are. There's a quote that says, "You wouldn't worry so much about what others think of you if you realized how seldom they do." And that's such a good reminder. I feel like social media, whether you're a creator or just you have an Instagram account with the people from high school and college and all of that, I feel like social media makes us think that there's so many eyeballs on us, and it puts a lot of pressure on us to do things that we feel like people won't judge us for or society respects. I think about this a lot with career as well. You know, we're self-employed in the marketing space. Okay, well, one could say that society really values a corporate marketing job over someone that's doing things on their own. But you can't live your life like that. You can't base your decisions off of what you think people are going to respect, or people are going to say, "Oh, wow, like that's awesome that she became the lawyer." Okay, if you would have based your decision off of that, you would have went to law school and you would have you would have put years into going to law school to become a lawyer because you thought society respected the decision to become a lawyer. But when you realize that people aren't thinking about you really at all, they're all thinking about themselves. People are inherently selfish. It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of it. It really frees you to say, I can do whatever I want and no one cares.
Mm-hmm. It's called the spotlight effect, I believe. And it's basically the idea that, I forget what the stat is, but we think that people are paying attention to us so much more than they are, because we're thinking about ourselves so much that we assume other people are doing the same thing. So even when you're in public, and like, this is a perfect example. Last night, Erin and I were walking home from an event and I just literally tripped over the corner of the sidewalk. Like it was like where the sidewalk kind of like ramps up, and then there was like a curb, and I just like didn't see the curb part of the sidewalk, and I just tripped like fully tripped straight over.
Okay,
it.
you caught yourself. You didn't fall over.
No, I caught myself. I did not go like face into the concrete, which thank God. But I did trip pretty hard, and literally nobody looked. Like no one. Like there was a whole bunch of people that were doing some like construction or whatever on some sort of business on the corner of the street. Literally nobody turned around. And I could sit there and be like, oh my gosh, everyone's paying attention to me. They were all looking at me. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. Because in that moment, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I just tripped, and I'm catching myself and I'm catching my own breath after just like almost going face into the ground. No one's paying attention. And because we think about ourselves so much, it's called the spotlight effect. We think that people are paying attention to us. And it goes into the judgment part of it too, where we've talked about this in the podcast before, where it's like, you looking at somebody else and saying, oh my gosh, you know, they must be judging me, or I wonder what they're thinking about me, is actually you projecting your own judgment of yourself onto them. Because like if I assume, oh, Erin looked at me, she must be judging me. That's me assuming Erin is a judgmental girl and is looking at me and being judgmental. What does that say about me? If I'm assuming everybody else is judgmental, I'm just insecure, you know, because why would everyone be judging me? Because I think everyone's paying attention to me way more than they are. But it's just like, I don't know, it's crazy to think about how much that puts you in such a trap, and where that puts you mentally, and how then that like impacts your life.
Yeah. And they say a lot of times we base our decisions and we become almost afraid to put ourselves out there because of the fear of judgment from people that actually do not matter in your life at all. Think about the people whose opinions you actually respect. It's God, your family, your friends. Outside of that, the opinions don't matter.
Yeah, I don't know, y'all.
If someone is judging you, which they're literally not, their opinions don't matter. They say, don't let people who you wouldn't trade lives with affect how you run your life. And I feel like that's such a good quote and a good thing to remember. You know, if someone isn't where you want to be, why are you sitting there thinking if they're judging you or not, or caring what they might possibly think? Just put yourself out there, and who cares?
Yeah.
I also think, like, back to the conversation around moving away in your 20s, and everyone says, you know, move to a new city, because if not, you're going to be trapped in this idea of your fear of judgment from people who knew you from a past life, which I do think there's a lot of merit in that. I think if you've been getting the bug to move away in your 20s, you can learn so much from it. But I also think that sometimes that can put you into a little bit of a trap, because it almost validates you not taking action until you do it. You don't have to move away in your 20s to put yourself out there to go after what you want. If you're using that as an excuse for why you're not currently becoming the version of yourself that you want to be, why you're not stepping into the next level version of yourself, then you're using it as an excuse, and it's not an excuse. I also think moving away and changing your physical environment is only a piece of it. You have to change your online environment as well, which if you're listening to this podcast, I feel like you probably do a pretty good job of that. Yeah. But if you move to a new city and then you're still logging into your high school Instagram account, and every single person you're seeing on your Instagram is the people you knew from high school, the people you knew from college, okay, you're still going to be inherently afraid of the judgment from those people. I think you really do have to be intentional about changing your online environment and consuming things from people that you don't know, or inspiring people, or people doing what you want to do out of life. Changing that online environment is going to be the second piece to that puzzle that's actually going to release you from that fear of judgment.
You have to learn to value your own opinion of yourself more than you do others. And I actually think that sometimes we don't take enough time to consider how we even feel about ourselves. And I think when you can look inward, that's actually like a really, really powerful place to start. Because, for example, you know, sometimes I don't really go on my personal Instagram anymore, but it is a lot of people from middle school, high school, college, whatever. And I used to think when I started content, I'd be like, oh, I wonder what people are thinking about me in terms of my career, because it's a strange feeling at first to be like, okay, this ad that I made for this brand is showing up on my high school boyfriend's feed, you know, or like my middle school bully, like my ad is showing up on her feed. Like that's like a really weird feeling almost. And you do kind of ponder what people have thought. And I'm sure this is relevant whether you're a content creator or not. Obviously, when you post a job update on LinkedIn, or you get into a relationship, or even you're just posting pictures of yourself, you wonder, oh, what do people from school think about me now? But then you have to ask yourself, like, what do I think of me? Because again, I think we end up projecting our own feelings about ourselves onto other people without realizing those are our own feelings about ourselves, right? If you're worrying, oh my gosh, does my, you know, like, it's so random, but I worked at McDonald's in high school, and sometimes it's like, I'm like, I wonder what my coworker from McDonald's is like thinking about this, because like, I'm like, why did he comment on my post, or like, why did she like my story, you know? And I'm like, what was their thought? Like, what were they thinking about this? Oh, did they think that maybe I'm like not as like pretty as I used to be, or maybe like they think it's weird that I, you know, moved to a new city, or maybe they think it's weird that I am a content creator, or I don't know, whatever it may be. Then you have to stop and go, why are those fears? Why are those fears specifically the things that my brain is picking out? Probably because there's a place within me that believes those things to be true, because otherwise they really wouldn't be that top of mind. Like, I wouldn't be worried about whether other people think me being a content creator is weird unless there was a little piece of me inside that is coming up, because I'm worried about people perceiving me as that way, because I believe that to be true. And one of my friends, she would always ask, mostly when she was doing some work online, and when people would comment something rude or whatever, she would always say, and what within you was triggered by that? And I would actually take that and reframe it for myself. What within me was triggered by that? What within me was bothered by the idea of, oh, someone from school is perceiving me in a certain way? Probably because there's a part of me that believes that to be true. And so I think that when we think about this judgment, and you know, people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are, you're thinking about yourself a ton. And you're thinking about yourself in ways maybe that you're then projecting onto other people and assuming they're judging you for that, simply just because that's how you feel about yourself.
And if you're listening to this being like, wow, I feel really called out.
You're probably called in, not called out. Okay,
we all do it. I think that's like the point here is that we literally all do it. And there's a reason that we do it, because I think that society has these kind of norms. And especially when we are talking, you know, on this podcast, we talk a lot about building your dream life, building a life that you truly love. A lot of that is striving for more than average, a lot more than average. And unfortunately, a lot of those things are going to force you to do things that are not normal. So naturally our first instinct is to think that people are judging us, think that, oh my gosh, she's really going against the grain, she's really doing something different here. That's okay, that's normal, that's part of it. You have to just kind of acknowledge that you are feeling that way because you know you're doing something different than most people. But again, back to point number one, we are not striving to be average here. I heard this a couple of years ago, and I feel like this is such a good example. I use this example all the time. And it has to do with money, but I feel like it really has to do with living life on your own terms and building a life that provides you what you're looking for out of life, despite kind of going against the norm. So it's the example comparing two 22-year-olds. Person A did what a lot of people do. They go to college, they take out $25,000 a year in student loan debt to graduate at 22 with $100,000 in debt. Person B decides to go against the grain, live at home for 4 years after high school, and work so much to earn $50,000 annually. And because they're living at home, they invest $25,000 per year. Person A at 22 years old has $100K in debt, and person B has $100K invested at 22. If person B never invested another dollar, they'd have $1 million by the age of 52. And when I heard this, I feel like it's a really good example of how doing things that might be against the quote unquote norm. In this case, I think it's the living at home right after high school and deciding to, you know, delay that gratification of those 20 something experiences and really save and invest for the first 4 years out of high school. That can set you up to have a life that 99% of people will never have. Having $100K invested at 22 years old is an experience that 99% of people will never experience in your life. That person has set themselves up to not be in debt, have a really good investment portfolio, decide at that point what they actually want to do with their lives, and go after that quote unquote dream life. And this is not to demonize college. It's not to demonize the path that a lot of us probably did take years ago, because a lot of people listening to this podcast are not college age anymore. That's not the point. This can be applied to any scenario. It's just going against the grain and saying, this is the dream life that I have for myself. How do I get there despite going against the quote unquote norm to get there?
I think this goes back to our other lesson about risk and assessing the risk of the decisions that you make. And I think with this conversation around, like, you know, everyone is thinking about themselves more than they're really thinking about you. You have to remember that people might not like the choices that you make. They might not agree with them. It might not be the choice that they would make if they were in your shoes, but you have to think about the risk of staying where you are and the joy that's on the other side if you listen to what you want. And I feel like this happens a lot with career. I know for me, my parents were always like supportive of my career to a degree, but the idea of basically throwing out my whole college degree and that I was now $70,000 of student loan debt and deciding to be, you know, start a freelance marketing business with no marketing experience. My parents always knew I'm incredibly capable. They were like, yeah, like, you've got it. You will find a way. That's how you work. But I remember after, like, when I first started the business, my mom would always say, out of just immense care for me, she wanted the best for me, but she would say, you know, what about a full-time job?
Wait, that's great.
Or, you know, she'd be like, well, at least then you would have benefits and you'd have some like steady income. And I was like, no, it's fine. Like, I have to commit to the bit here. Like, I have to keep going because I know that if I keep going, it will be really fruitful on the other side, but it might take a little while. And when I would have really hard months where, I mean, there were some months in the beginning that were just awful and I was working so much and I, you know, would end the month and then lose a client or whatever it might be. And, you know, she would say, well, you know, full-time job, like, is looking pretty good right now, you know, and she never said it because she didn't believe in me. She said it because she saw, I mean, how much I was hurting, and I just chose to like push through that. And I'm really glad I did. But she would see how much I'm hurting and how stressed out I was and how much I was working. And this whole framework of work that I was trying to get into was very new to my parents' generation, the idea of like working online and whatever, being a freelancer. And in that situation, like if I let what other people might have done in my situation and go with the quote unquote safe choice of getting a corporate role, if I let that override my intuition that this is what I want to do, and I know if I commit to this, like I will have so much joy on the other side, I would have ended up in a career that I don't love. And I think about that a lot with, obviously this example is about, college age people, but even when you're older, let's say you're in your mid 30s and or even your late 20s, and you want to make a career change, and you're like, okay, what do I do? And you have a stable role right now, and maybe people in your life are like, wow, you're so lucky to have that job. It's, really stable and it pays well and da 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 da. But you're not happy. You can sit there and you can worry about what people are thinking about it, or you can make the choice for yourself. And at the end of the day, again, it's like, would I want to trade places with these people who are making that decision on my behalf? Do they have the same intuition or the same feeling or drive that I have about this decision? No. And like, then it's like, okay, just listen to what your heart is saying. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out and you figure something else out,
Yeah. And again, it's natural to have those feelings that people are judging you, or feelings that it's not the right decision because it's against the norm. But again, we're not striving for normal. I saw a quote a couple of months ago that said that 37% of freelancers make more money and work less hours than someone with a full-time job. And I saw a TikTok video probably about a year ago. This girl was walking down the street in the middle of the day, and she was saying, I was unhappy in my corporate job, so I quit my corporate job. Now I have 2 freelance clients and I'm a bartender, and I have so much free time and make way more money than I did in my corporate job. And I love that so much, because I think that that's truly like what we're trying to do here, is just remind people that the life that you want to live is possible. You just have to go look for it. And I think that in that girl's example, it would have been easy for her to say, well, I'm not happy in my corporate job. It doesn't pay an insane amount of money. I'm working so much and I'm not happy, but it sounds good that I work for this big corporation, so I'm going to stick it out. And she might also say, well, what are people going to think of me if I say that I quit my corporate job to bartend? No, she's so much happier. She said she loves the people that she works with at her bartending job. It's so fun. And she has 2 freelance clients, and she has so much time to work on them during the day because she bartends at night. I love that so much. Like, you really have we're in 2026 now. You have the ability to design a career that really fits the lifestyle that you want to live. I also really like this concept of your portfolio career. Essentially, the idea is that, when people say, what do you do for work? I think if you have a corporate job, you have a really good answer for that, right? I don't think I have a really good answer for that right now. Like, I'm a content creator. I work with a startup. I do a podcast. Like, there's so many things. There's so many different ways I make money, but that's fun. You should allow yourself to remove this idea of your identity being wrapped up in work from a traditional standpoint, and just say, I get to do whatever I want to do. There are so many different ways to make money, and I'm going to go after them because I want to kind of design this life that I actually love.
I think a lot of this, and again, obviously, if you listen to the podcast, or unless you're a new listener, which welcome.
You picked a good episode.
I know. The whole concept of the podcast is building a life you love, not the life we love, the life you love. And I think at the end of the day, there's a level of authenticity, of just like radical authenticity, that you have to have. And then you have to figure out, at what point am I going to choose to pursue joy over what other people think, or over practicality? Like, the more quote unquote practical thing to do in that situation is to have that corporate job. Is it the most practical to have, a couple freelance clients and work at a bar at night? No. Like, it's not the traditional quote unquote thing to do. And I'm sure there are, that will, there will be limitations if that person wants kids, or what their schedule is going to look like, what their partner's schedule looks like, just other life responsibilities. There are things that come up. However, you have to figure out what your threshold is for, I'm going to take living an inauthentic life, or a life that doesn't excite me, or that I'm, a life that pleases other people but not me, to a certain point. And then there has to be a threshold where you say, you know what, enough is enough, and I'm going to pursue joy. I'm going to pursue what I want because I know this is the life that I want to live. I'm going to show up for, these consistent habits every day that I say I want to do because that's the life that I want to have. That's the person that I want to be. I'm going to stop focusing on trying to make the right decision and just make a decision that I think is going to get me marginally closer to the life that I want to have and commit to that and iterate from there. I'm going to stop thinking that everybody is caring about me way more than they are. And I'm going to realize that what I assume they're thinking of me is just my own projections that are coming from within. And I'm going to work on that so that I get to show up as the person who's healthy and whole and really happy with my life all around. Like that's what this podcast is really all about. And what we hope that everyone gets out of all these episodes is like, you can really have a life you love. You have to show up. You have to be honest with yourself and commit to those daily actions that are going to get you closer to that.
And I think to kind of wrap up this episode, all of these lessons are really rooted in fear of something. And this is so funny. This was actually a quote from, I said this in my high school graduation speech. So that was, 9 years ago at this point? I literally said this 9 years ago. I said, don't let fear get disguised as practicality. And I think that that's such a good way to wrap up this episode. Whatever you want out of life is probably not practical. It's probably not the norm. It's probably not what 99% of people around you are doing, but don't let your fear of something get disguised as practicality. Because what you want to do, it probably will be scary. There probably will be risk involved, but you owe it to yourself to go after it. So with that, I think that wraps up today's episode. This was so fun. We filmed in studio. If you're watching the video episode of this, we never film in studio. We're always virtual. So this was so fun that we got to do this, and definitely let us know on Spotify if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed seeing us in HD. We're like up here we look so crystal clear right now. So yeah, let us know on Spotify if you like that. And we want to prioritize more studio content this year because it was so fun to be in person together. But with that brings us to the end of today's episode, and until next week.